Good afternoon, everybody. This is Kathy Salisbury, the director of the Ambler Arboretum at Temple University. And to maintain the health of our community and our staff, we are still closed to the public. And so I'm bringing you once again a little bit of plant tour from my backyard. And so just going to show you a few plants today that are blooming in June this time of the year. I encourage you to keep an eye out on our website. We have a brand new website. It's arboretum.temple.edu, super simple, to see what other programs we have going on and have planned, and also to keep an eye out for when we will open and what that will look like. So please make sure you come and visit us. So we're going to start today with one of my favorites, and I probably say that about almost every plant I show you. They are in my yard, so I tend to pick them and like them, and that's why I picked them, right? So a lot of them are my favorites, but this one is called Purple Flowering Raspberry. It is Rubus odoratus. And the weird noises you might hear in the background as I'm speaking, if you can hear it, are my chickens. This is close by to them. And so some of the things I really like about this plant, well, first of all, the deer don't tend to bother it, which is great in this yard in particular. I also like that the flowers, it flowers for a very long period of time, for a lot of the summer. This just keeps putting out more and more blooms. And as it does, older flowers fade, so you actually have a nice range of pink colors on the plants all at one time, and so it does look really nice, and it has a really long display time. It is attractive to pollinators. As I'm recording this, you see kind of some smaller insects visiting the flowers, and I've seen giant bumblebees on here, so it is attractive to a number of pollinators, which is nice. The stems don't have thorns, rather they're covered with hairs. And so you can kind of see the hairs on the stems here. And they do get fruit, but I will say if you want an edible raspberry type fruit, this is not the plant that you should grow. There is a difference between edible and delicious, right? And this one falls into the edible category, but not necessarily the delicious category. The berries are kind of dry and crumbly and not so rewarding. If you were lost in the woods and came across that, you might, partake, but otherwise plant some other raspberry and blackberry species for the edible fruits. And so you can see the leaves here are kind of lobed, and it is a suckering plant, so you can see down here a little baby is formed. They will kind of spread through layering and through suckering from underground. So just keep that in mind. They're easy to transplant and to keep in check. They're not super aggressive. And the other great attribute of this is it tolerates shade and moist soils. And so if you have that kind of wetter, shady place, this does do well. I have it growing in full shade, and you can see it's flowering just fine. You would likely get more flowers in part shade or full sun, but I am happy with this one here. So we're going to go on to the next plant. And here we are in the shady perennial border that I have here. And we're looking at Spigelia marilandica, or Indian pink, which is kind of a misnomer because the flowers are really this bright crimson red. And you can see as they open, they have this yellow center. And hummingbirds are the animal that are known to cross-pollinate this. Not much is known about the pollination of this plant, but it has been proven that hummingbirds do cross-pollinate these. And so hummingbirds, of course, love these long red tubular flowers. It is native to southeastern PA and the southeastern United States. It's clump forming and tolerates, again, some damp soils, moist soils, and shade. That is the condition that I have in my yard. So that's a lot of the focus of the plants here, although they will do fine in part sun as well. They do like shade. Mammals tend to not eat this. Deer may browse on this, but there's a lot of bitter and and toxins in the leaves that tend to keep mammals away from eating this plant. It's relatively pest and disease free here, and just has quite a long bloom time, so it'll bloom for about a month in the garden, and so you can tuck it in among your perennials in the shade garden and really be rewarded with this bright red color in late May to early June. And now to a plant that the deer really do seem to enjoy, although they've been leaving it alone so far in this yard, is Oakleaf Hydrangea, Hydrangea quercifolia. And the Oakleaf Hydrangea is named for its lobed leaves that are kind of shaped like oak leaves. You can see the leaves here. This is really a coarse textured plant. So when you're thinking about design or using plants in your landscape, you can think about the flowers, which are important, and we really love them, and they're good for pollinators and birds and, all kinds of wildlife. But as far as a display goes, you really want to look at the texture, the shape, the color of the foliage in your yard, because you can add a lot of interest to your landscape just by varying the texture and the color of the foliage. And so this adds a very coarse, almost tropical texture to the garden. This is the front of my house, sort of as a foundation planting. You certainly can't see the foundation anymore with this plant here. So the hydrangea flowers tend to have two types of flowers. These showy ones that we see here, the kind of bright white ones, those are infertile flowers, and they're really meant to attract pollinators or be showy. And then the interior flowers are much smaller, not showy, and those are the fertile flowers. So that's where seeds are formed. That's where pollinators would go. And so most hydrangea flowers have a combination of both. And so in addition to the very coarse texture, the neat shape of the foliage, this also gets a great yellow fall color. A maroon fall color, kind of a deep burgundy fall color. I was just thinking that I forgot to tell you that the raspberry leaves get a nice yellow fall color. And so the other nice thing about this is that it has a nice fall color. And as it ages, the branches get this nice exfoliating bark. So you'll see it start to look shreddy and peely. So it is deciduous. So when it loses its leaves, the branches are exposed, but then you have this really cool detail of exfoliating bark. So that's a nice little bit of interest to add into the landscape. This is native to the southeastern portion of the United States. And I have to tell you that when I saw it for the first time in the wild, I was in Mississippi, and I was road tripping with my sister. We were on our way back to New Jersey from Louisiana, and we stayed in a state park in Mississippi, and we're hiking along the trails, and there it was, just blooming away in the woods. And I did a happy dance, and I was so excited. And my sister just sort of stood there and looked at me, waited for me to get over it, and then we continued on our way. And but yes, so that's one of those things that sticks with me to this day, even though that was, probably 12, 15, maybe even 20 years ago now. So yeah, a long time ago, but still sticks in my memory of where I first saw this growing in the wild. In the wild, it was a much less full plant, kind of straggly, but here it's doing really well. And so that's Oakleaf Hydrangea. And another shrub. This is a shrub that is just going out of bloom. So these are some of the last flowers on here. This is called Euonymus americanus. This is hearts a bursting, or strawberry bush. And so this is a native cousin of burning bush, which a lot of us know as that shrub that turns bright red in the fall. A lot of us also know it as an invasive plant. This is a cousin of that plant. This turns, at least in my woods, more of a yellow color in the fall, not so dramatic as burning bush is. And these flowers, when they're finished blooming, then they're followed by these it's called strawberry bush because they kind of look like the wild strawberry, and then they burst open and they expose these bright orange seeds that come out of them. And so this is a clump forming shrub. It does get browsed by deer, but the deer actually encourage, as long as they don't decimate it, they encourage the colonization of this shrub. So that browsing actually encourages new growth from below and gets the plant expanding a little bit more in its range. So this is trying to focus in on that flower again, not working. So one of the cool things that I've noticed in my yard, at least on this shrub, is I've seen, you can see where all these flowers, they're kind of faded now. They don't have their petals. But I have noticed, here's a couple of more flowers here. So I've noticed actually hummingbirds going to the flowers and tapping each flower one by one. And if you notice in that recording that I was just doing of, and here you can see them here, there's little tiny insects on these flowers, and little flying insects or sometimes little ants. And hummingbirds will actually gather small insects for protein. But they could be going after the nectar as well, but they might have been gathering the small insects on the flowers. So don't just think like the spigelia, the Indian pink, that you need these bright red tubular flowers to attract hummingbirds. That's not always the case, although it definitely helps attract them to your yard. And having a hummingbird feeder helps too, but don't just make the assumption that some other plants that you have in your landscape might not attract hummingbirds. So this is Euonymus elatus. You know it by its green stems. It's very shiny, opposite leaves here, and these great flowers. And then the fruits are really distinctive once they go into fruit. Hopefully, we'll be back in the Arboretum, so I won't show you the fruits from my yard, but maybe I'll show you the fruits from the Arboretum, where we do have these as well. All right, and the last plant I'm going to show you today is one that The last plant I want to show you today is one that I actually have growing in my yard thanks to some seed collecting I did along the roads near my house. So this is growing wild in the woods and along the edges, the roadside edges. And so I just love it. And it's one of the few grasses that really just wants to grow in shade or full shade. It will grow in sun as well, but it does it's called Bottlebrush Grass. It's Euonymus hystrix, and you can see why it's called Bottlebrush Grass. And that hystrix in the species name means hedgehog, and of course that's in reference to kind of spiky inflorescence that it has here. But shade-loving grasses you don't find a ton of. Of course, I've talked about sedges before and how I just really appreciate sedges in the landscape and have a ton of them because they do well in shade and suit all kinds of conditions. And if you have a drier, shady area, this grass might be good for you to use. This is a good cut flower. And once the flowers and the seeds turn brown, then they kind of shatter. So they're not good cut flowers then. But then you can collect them and just scatter them around. And that's what I've done in my yard. And so I have them here and there around the landscape, just sort of popping up. And I leave them be just wherever they want to seed in. And I really enjoy them. They're about 4 feet tall with the inflorescence on them. So, and they can be quite showy, and they get to be a nice sized clump. They are perennial. They do come back every year. They tolerate drought. Almost all the plants I've shown you today tolerate black walnuts. So if you're thinking that there's nothing that will grow under a black walnut, that is not true. This is an example of one of them that will. The Rubus odoratus will also, the purple flowering raspberry I showed you, will also tolerate black walnut. So they are, and so will the hearts of Burston. So there's plenty of plants that will live under black walnut, and this bottlebrush grass is one of them. And this also, we don't think, just like we might not think of the hearts of Burston as a plant for hummingbirds, we might not think of grasses as a plant for butterflies and moths. But in fact, this plant is a larval host plant for a number of moth and butterfly species. And so we don't want to just think flowers when we're planting our gardens and especially our native gardens for wildlife. We want to think about what leaves the caterpillars will eat. And in this case, the caterpillars will eat some of the leaves on this for particular butterflies and moths. So just a few more plants from my garden. We too have this at the Ambler Arboretum in the formal native plant garden. And and other places in the woodlands. So we really cannot wait to have you back in the gardens to do these tours together, face to face, in person, and are working very hard to make that day a reality. Until then, we are excited to have you along on these virtual tours. We encourage you again to visit us at the new Arboretum website at arboretum.temple.edu. And until we can see you in person, we hope you stay safe and healthy and enjoy the wonders of nature.